I would say many Christians, we really have very little ritual because of a tradition that came from a more established church, even from the Catholic Church down through denominational churches, that were very ritualistic. But what happened with the ritual is that the meaning of the ritual was lost. Consequently, it just became going through the motions. And that's just like in rhythm, we have to be careful of falling into monotony. With ritual, we need to be careful we don't get into empty, meaningless rote or practice. Some churches practice having what we call the communion. They do it every Sunday. I went to a church the first church that when we first arrived in Hong Kong, we met with a group of brethren. And the brethren, it's the, I forget where they're from, but it's the old brethren where they meet every morning for fellowship, every Sunday morning, and they take a chalice and fill it with wine, and then they pass it around, and everybody sips out of the same cup, which was fine. But we had this guy coming. He was, anyway, I didn't want to be after him, okay? So I suggested that maybe we should try something else. But the thing was, in fact, here's what happened. A little bit later, the leader came to me and he says, I noticed that you haven't been participating. And I said, you know, to me, it's just something that we go through. I don't know that we really know what it means or really even care what it means. It's just what we go through. And so then he kind of backed up and he went and explained it. But the purpose of the rituals is to help us then to enact, to show in a physical way through actions what it is we believe. And this again has a long history to it. I'm looking at the clock, okay? So just letting you know that I do see a clock here and we're going to be careful. Now, these rituals started a long time ago, back again in the book of Genesis. Do you remember the story then of how Eve was tempted and took of the forbidden fruit, gave it to Adam? Adam has no excuse. He should have known better. He made a choice. That's where the sin was. I don't know what would have happened if Adam had not and Eve did. I don't know what would have happened there. But Adam, man, he blew it for all of us because he took this sin knowingly disobeying against God. And what did God do? It's interesting because the Bible, and you wonder why these little details are there. The Bible tells us that Adam and Eve didn't know they were naked. Okay, so why did they have to say that? Well, because after they sinned, the very first thing that Adam and Eve do is to cover their nakedness. They were ashamed of themselves. And what does God do? God then sheds innocent blood in order that he can cover them with the skins of animals. Innocent animals that did not sin. And so right then a ritual was begun whereby an innocent animal, innocent blood, had to be shed in order then for us to come into God's presence. They could not continue in God's presence without being covered. Now, when we look at this, they continued then this ritual, as it were, until one day, after they've had two sons, Cain and Abel. Maybe you know the story. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. This is Genesis chapter 4, verse 3, and verse 4 now. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering, he, that's God, had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell, his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Again, there was this ritual that had begun, and Cain on his own decided that he would come to God on his own terms. Listen, folks, get this down. When we look at the book of Leviticus, we will see we do not come to God on our terms. It doesn't matter if you think that it's ridiculous. It doesn't matter if you think it's a bloody mess. We don't come to God on our terms. If we're to come into the presence of God, it will only be as He stipulates. Hard for us to accept sometimes because we, honestly, if we'll be very honest, we kind of think we're kind of like God, don't we? We like to be the one in charge. We have a real hard time with yielding to somebody who's greater than us. Just part of that rebellious spirit. Came from our father and mother, Adam and Eve. So, this ritual has begun with Cain and Abel and passed down through the generations to where we get to Noah. And I mentioned Noah already. And how Noah then, that the passage of Scripture that we read before in Genesis chapter 8, when they got out of the ark, what does he do? Sheds blood, burns an offering. It is a burnt offering to God. Then from Noah, down through those many generations in the book of Genesis, we come down to Abram. Abram, then, he's renamed Abraham. We also, in studying the life of Abraham, see that he was accustomed to these rituals, especially the burnt offering. He taught his sons. In fact, Isaac, his son, was going to be the sacrifice. That's another fascinating story about how God told him to take his only son, the promise of the succeeding generations that God had promised him, and he was to sacrifice him on the altar. Remember how God, the last minute, spares him. See, this ritual goes on down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, who was later called Israel. Israel then teaches his 12 sons, who are the patriarchs, the heads of the tribes, and so this ritual comes on down. Until now, they go into Egypt. When they go into Egypt, life changes. In fact, here's an interesting thing, folks. I was just reviewing this thing, doing a quick review from Genesis all the way down through, and I noticed that no mentions of sacrifice after they go into Egypt. From the time they go into Egypt, no mention of the word burnt offering or sacrifices at all, until they come back out, and now it has to be reestablished. So as they come back to reestablish it, here's what Moses says. This is a very important part because this is instrumental for the redemption of the people of God to get out of Egypt. This is the last chance. If you know the story goes that these different plagues, 9 of them now have passed, and every time Pharaoh says, okay, go, and then he changes his mind and says, no, come on back. So you talk about fickle. He just did whatever he wanted, but he was warned, this is the last time. And they were told then, Moses tells the people, in fact, as we'll read it in Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 11. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. Okay, notice, time is starting here. Creation of a new history is starting here. This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each can eat. You shall make your count for the lamb. Now, here it is. Your lamb shall be without blemish. It'll be a male, 1 year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it then until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood, put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire, with unleavened bread, with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It's the Lord's Passover. This is preparatory for them leaving. The Passover. The slaying of the lamb was preparation for them leaving. They got to be ready to leave. And so this is the first written establishment of the ritual. This is the first time in the Bible that a ritual is recorded in exactly how it needs to be done. Now, honestly, I look at that and I'm going, come on. Do you have to be so... Can't you just say, take a lamb, kill it, put the blood on the doors. No blood on the doors, no Passover. No, he tells them exactly what time to do it, at the twilight, exactly how it's to be killed, very carefully. Why? This is God giving instructions. Are we paying attention? Is God concerned about details? He must be. Does God want it done according to His plan? He does, and there's a reason for it. This was what established then this Passover ritual, which was to be on the first day of the year for the rest of time, down to this very day. A good, or I shouldn't say, I don't think it's a matter of good or bad, but a devout, yes, a devout Jew still carefully practices the Passover. It would be very helpful for us to bring in a Jew and have him explain that Passover and how it just points to Jesus Christ. Clearly points to Jesus Christ and His sacrifice for us. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ is the only sacrifice acceptable to God. He is the one who decides. Now, what this does is establishes a spiritual rhythm. Because in Leviticus chapter 7, here's what we read. Verse 37 it says, and this is at the end of those first 7 chapters where he's talking about these different offerings. This is the law of burnt offering, of the grain offering, of the sin offering, the guilt offering, of the ordination offering, of the peace offering, which the Lord commanded Moses on Mount Sinai on the day that He commanded the people of Israel to bring their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. So, what God has done now in the book of Leviticus is He's taken these rituals, get it, to establish a sense of spiritual rhythm in our lives. How many of us, and I'll be the first to raise my hand, we struggle with our spiritual life because it seems to go up and down, up and down. And it doesn't seem to have a sense of continuity to it. Maybe the reason it's losing continuity is because we simply haven't developed a sense of rhythm in ritual. Well, how do we do that? I can't go into all of it here because we're going to speak about it when we get into the sacrificial system. The sacrificial system of Leviticus was installed by God so that His people would develop a rhythm and a method of being able to come to God. Did it fall? Did it become meaningless? Did it become just rote practice? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. But God then had to bring them back. Brother David Freeman has some pictures, well, he's promised he's going to show me sometime, of the Hindu priests doing this exact kind of sacrifice, where they'll have a whole line of people with their animals in tow, and they're waiting for their turn to go up and sacrifice the animal. It is a mess, I've been told. But here's the thing. Where does that come from? It comes from this ancient practice of understanding there needs to be this ritual. It reminds us that we have to bring an offering or a sacrifice to come before the presence of God. Now then, going down, these established spiritual rhythms. First is this sacrificial system. Then there's this ritual cleansing or the purity. Now here's the thing. These 7-day rituals move from unclean to clean. After a woman gives birth to a male, she has 7 days in order to go through this purification process. And it's a matter of a couple days for a girl. I don't know what the difference is. We'll find out. And so it's a part of a cleansing process. Also, after a woman has a menstrual period, 7 days in which there's this cleansing process. After a person has contact with a corpse, 7 days of this ritual